Welcome to How To, a Quality Digest series for quality control and quality assurance professionals who need quick instruction on how to get something done. In this episode, we're going to talk about failed master gauges, what to do when you learn a master gauge is out of spec. Eric Gasper of PQ Systems will explain what you do. So Eric, what do you do when one of your master gauges or blocks is returned from a vendor after being found to be out of tolerance?
We have these master gauges, and for a shop floor, really why we're using these is just a way to be able to compare our devices against some known value. Now, why that's important is when we're doing our internal calibrations, we need to have something that is, again, a known value that we can make our comparison and establish our own gauges measuring correctly. Are they accurate and are they true? Now, when those master gauges, you have those at your facility, you're going to be sending those out to some outside vendor that's going to be able to establish whether or not those particular gauges are actually still good. And the big risk here is when you do have an issue, when they're outside of their own tolerances and they get sent back. Now that calls into question pretty much all the gauges you used that master set or that block or that standard with. And that could represent a lot of work and a lot of heartache for our quality engineers and throughout the entire organization. It's a problem. So one of the things that you can take a look at, and we're going to go through probably an example here, and let's imagine that we just had to send out a particular master of ours that was noticed to be a bit maybe mishandled or damaged. Even though it has a calibration that's a little bit further out into the future, we've determined we're going to send it out ahead of time because we're just not sure and we're not comfortable with the risk of using a damaged master. Well, you know what? As luck would have it, or as unluck in this case, we did get it back from our outside vendor and it is out of tolerance, in a couple places significantly. So now what do? Well, you can record that calibration, and one of the great benefits is as soon as you've completed that information, you fill it in the details that are necessary. GagePack in this case actually identifies, hey, do you want to see the list of all the impacted gauges that now need to be reviewed? So that's a huge leg up. So instead of me just wondering or having to do a lot of extra background work, I now have a concise list of here's all the gauges that I know had a calibration in the recent past that were used with this master gauge. So that's one of the first places that we're going to start our investigation.
Well, that's great. So you're able to identify all the impacted gauges, which obviously is an important first step. But the next thing is like, okay, now I know I know all my gauges that have been impacted. So what do I do now? I mean, what do I do with this list of gauges that I've got and that I know that I can't really trust anymore, right?
Yeah. So hopefully this master, hasn't been used maybe that often, or maybe you've just had it calibrated not too long ago. So this list of gauges hopefully is small. That means there's going to be less investigation work. So now that I have this list of gauges, I know which ones may need to be pulled from the shop line because now I don't know if I can really trust them. And the second thing to do is to take a look at the actual calibrations. Those calibrations that relate to those particular devices, gauges that were used with that master. So again, hopefully it's only a handful, but if you've got several hundred, that just means that you're going to have a little bit of work on your hands. So the first thing that I would do is take a look at the actual results of those calibrations and also consider how out of tolerance were your set of blocks or the master or the standard. Is it just off by a little bit, or was it, again, a significant difference? Because there might be some of these calibrations that we can rule out, meaning, you know what? The calibration was pretty much dead to rights. It was right on the target. We had no issues, and the significant amount of difference in that master calibration is likely not going to impact the overall results. For any of the other gauges, even if you just have a suspicion, well, I'm just not sure, the appropriate measure would be to recalibrate those gauges and potentially use a different set of masters that have also been re-verified and are known to be good to go. But that's really where the work begins, and hopefully the different operators, the quality managers, hopefully you're not reacting to this for the first time if you ever get back a failed master calibration. The hope is that you've actually already talked about this with your team, you've documented what's going to happen, And in a way, it's almost like having an evacuation plan. In the case of a fire, we need to do this, go here, and we'll be safe. The same thing is true. If you have any quality department, any tooling and devices and gauges, you need to have a discussion and a plan ready to go if ever a master gauge comes back out of tolerance.
But one question that immediately comes to mind when you're saying identify the impacted gauges, do you go from the time the every gauge that was calibrated using that master gauge from the last time that master gauge was calibrated, or do you do it from when you think maybe that master gauge was dropped? If you follow what I'm saying is, I mean, how far back do you need to go to assess which gauges have been impacted?
So great question. And in fact, right out of the box, when I recorded that master calibration event as a failure, it auto-generated a special filter. And it does look at the last time that master was calibrated successfully, all the way up to this point. And that's where it's looking back and it's creating this list of all the gauges. But a great feature is the fact that I can go in and I can, with a couple of clicks, I can actually adjust that date. Because just like you said, maybe it's been fine, no problems, but we know we just dropped it or we saw the misuse happen last week.
Okay.
So now we can actually further qualify this filter to see, all right, instead of all of the time since the last time it was calibrated, just give us this last week or month or whatever window you like. And that should shorten the actual investigation phase. We know it was fine before, but now after this event, we're going to take a look at just those gauges. So you get the best of both worlds. GagePack will do it first for you one way, but then as a user, you can overrule it and say, this is the actual time frame that we're most interested in.
Okay, perfect. Well, Eric, thanks for telling us what to do when you have a failed master gauge.
Thank you much, and I hope nobody ever has to go through this.
Exactly.